Hi, I'm Stan DeFreitas, Mr. Greenthumb.
And I'm James DeFreitas, and today we're at a local mom and pop nursery, and we're going to show you a lot of interesting color that you can use in your spring garden.
Come grow with Stan and James DeFreitas on the Ask Mr. Greenthumb show. With a multitude of popular plant information, learn how to identify, grow, nourish, and explore the wonderful world of green lush gardens. We hope to enlighten your senses with new ways to plant healthy greenery. You too can get the Greenthumb blessing. Come grow with Stan and James DeFreitas on the Ask Mr. Greenthumb show.
Well, James, as you said, we're at a mom and pop nursery and we're going to look at color, color, and more color, right?
Absolutely, and it looks like you've got some really interesting plants here on this cart. What's going on with this guy here? I know it's a rose, but I couldn't tell you what kind of rose it is.
Well, this is actually a Don Juan.
Okay.
And I like it because it's a climber. Now, it's a grafted rose, which is great.
Now, what does that mean, grafted rose?
Now, grafted means we've got the top part is grafted to, the scion is grafted to a rootstock. And the reason that we do this is that sometimes we have nematodes, little microscopic eelworms in the soil that can cause trouble. And sometimes we do it to impart cold hardiness, and sometimes just to give us an overall stronger plant.
Okay, so grafting, I mean, this is something that is done way back when this plant was being, when it was first started from a seed, or how does that work?
Well, they start a rootstock,
okay.
And then
when you say rootstock, what exactly does that mean?
This is called Fortuniana rootstock, and it's a real strong rootstock, but it has very insignificant flowers. So the flower wouldn't be something you'd get real excited about, but it makes a real strong base.
Okay.
It's just like a building. If you've got a good base, everything else is great.
Okay.
And if you started this on its own,
we wouldn't have these pretty flowers starting out.
It might not last as long. It
Okay.
might last a year or two, and with a good rootstock, it might last 30 or 40 years.
Okay. Now, and again, a lot of times people plant roses because they think of the fragrance. They think of how pretty it smells. Is this the type of rose that we could expect a nice fragrance from, or is it very muted and mild?
This one has a pretty nice fragrance, not as bolsterous as some fragrances, but it's smooth and you'll smell a nice little fragrance from it.
Oh, it is nice.
We actually had this growing on an archway at our old house in Clearwater.
Okay, yeah, we did, didn't we?
And it was vigorous, and you know what I loved about it is it lasted like 20 years and I didn't hardly have to do anything to it. I didn't have to spray it for fungus or mildew or mites or aphids, and a lot of the hybrid teas do seem to have a lot of problems. This one's a roughy toughy. It's like a Spartan.
Well, why is that though? Because it's been grafted, or because it's had a better foundation?
I think because it is a strong root foundation on the Fortuniana, and I think this is a stronger scion. I think it's a stronger top that just says, I'm impervious to you. Throw your best at me. And I can't say that about all roses. Some roses are kind of, you got to be out there spraying all the time for black spot and powdery mildew and downy mildew. Some people do it weekly.
And you're saying Fortuniana.
That's a type of rootstock.
Okay, that's a type of rootstock. So is this like a Latin name, or this is the common name that you would associate with this type of rose?
It's a common name for the rootstock that is there. There's probably this and Dr. Huey, and there's a couple of others that have been used. Fortuniana is probably one of the most common through most of the country.
So when I go to my local mom and pop nursery, I would say I want a Fortuniana?
Yes.
That's what I would say.
That's the rootstock you'd be looking for, and this one actually has it on the tag.
Okay.
So often it would say that.
Okay.
And it'll list the rootstock that it came from, and it'll give you the varietal name of what it is.
Gotcha.
You know, it could be JFK, or it could be a Imperial. There are so many that have been award winners. This one is more of a climber, though you could keep it cut as sort of a shrub rose.
Okay.
But you could build a structure and it will climb up on it too. It doesn't really have tendrils, but you could easily tape it to a structure and it would give you maybe a 6 or 7 foot structure.
Okay, and then if you have small children, the thorns, do we have big thorns that are going to be protruding on this, or is this pretty much has a muted thorn?
This one is not as bad. I mean,
Okay.
some have really, strong darting needle-like thorns. This one, yes, it has thorns like most roses, but not bad.
Okay, so not like the Bougainvillea that we used to sing with. It has a 2-inch sword.
Yeah, not a dagger.
Yeah.
You know, if you brushed up against it, you might notice it, but I know of all the years we had it growing near our front door, I never remember any child going, "Oh, I got stuck by the rose in the front."
Sure. Whereas I have bougainvilleas planted all around my house, and I tend to refer to those as the burglar bush, mainly because I have that in lieu of ADT.
Is right. So you'll know when you have this, it's not going to be the burglar bar, but nice color, and it seems to flower on a pretty regular basis. I mean, maybe not in the middle of winter, but all of the spring warm months and in temperate areas, it will flower probably 9-10 months out of the year.
Okay, and this is very low maintenance, you're saying, compared to some of the other roses.
And that's one of my favorites. People are always responding to me, you know, by email and other things saying, "Hey, I want a rose that I can put in and I don't have to spray on a daily basis."
Well, that makes sense, yeah, because that's one of the things that I think holds a lot of people back with roses, is they immediately think, well, geez, they look great, but the guy has to come out and spray them every 2 weeks to keep them looking good. And I'm not sure, I think that would turn some people off.
And I would say, like, for most roses, I would make, as I always joke, the $10 hole. I'd add a lot of peat moss, a lot of manure. I'd really improve the soil, because a good foundation for it will pay you dividends in the long run.
Makes sense. It's very pretty. I love the red colors on it, and it's very nice.
Very vibrant, very pretty, and you see you got some new red growth coming on some of the new growth, which is nice. It looks healthy. Look for one that's nice and green, good color if you're picking out one. I like to see good flowers already on it at the nursery. I don't want to have to wait 6 months to find out, is it going to be a good flowering variety or not?
Sure. Well, and I even notice when most of these plants that you pick up at your local nursery, you know, it's got little bits of fertilizer that are still in there, and you can see the soil is nice and dark. So I guess that's something people need to be thinking about too, is that if they fertilize them to begin with, you're going to be fertilizing them throughout the plant if you want it to do well.
Almost all the nurseries today will have a little time-released fertilizer, as you've pointed out, and that's good, because that means for the next 3 to 6 months, even if you forget it, it's getting fertilizer. Every time you water, a little bit of that fertilizer is being released. Now remember, since they do it, you should probably do it too. Mark on your calendar 3 months after you put it in, put it in your phone. Now is the time to put some more of that time released on, because they may give you 3 to 6 months, maybe a little longer, maybe up to 9 or 12. But I think if you go much more than 6 months, you're kind of pushing it. And roses are kind of heavy feeders. And if they start getting too little, then you start getting less bloom and less leaf and less everything.
That makes sense.
Good point for everyone to do.
Absolutely. So, Dad, it looks like we have something that's very interesting here. Almost looks like it's something you would see like in Asia or something, like a pagoda-looking thing.
Well, it's actually called a yellow shrimp plant.
Okay.
And you can kind of use your imagination. You can see where they came up with the name shrimp plant. Actually, the one that's orange to me even looks more like a shrimp, because the color does.
Ah, okay.
But these are Bellaparina, is the Latin name for it. But shrimp plant is common, what you'll go to find it as.
Okay.
Not real cold hardy, but you know, in the spring area, once you're past your last killing frost, you could go find these or order these. And I think they make a very interesting looking plant.
Gotcha.
And there again, I would make sure you improve the soil. You'd see that it has some soil fertilizer, little tiny beads that you're going to find. I've had people before pick out those little beads thinking they had something wrong. So if you see a little tiny bead that you get from the nursery, it's not an insect, it's not a problem.
Okay.
But I can understand if you're from a city and you haven't really worked with plants, I can see how you wouldn't know what that is.
Gotcha. And so the question I would have is that why does this petiole go up like this? Is there any reason for that?
It's just a natural...
and that is the correct term, right? Petiole?
Well, it's a natural flower stalk.
Okay. And does it disperse seeds? Is that what it's trying to do, getting it up high?
Yeah,
I mean,
these are the flowers.
Okay.
And I would say the petiole would be, below it would be a modified leaf.
Okay.
That's typically what we might call a petiole. And this is just, it's programmed to do this. And of course, this has a nice green color, kind of a little square stem to it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very geometric when you're starting to look at these finer details. So I noticed here that it kind of has a little bit of a sheen on the leaf. Is that, what's the thinking here? Is that to try to keep water inside the plant, or is that just another aesthetic of this particular type of plant?
It's just identifiable characteristic of the plant. Has kind of a pointed leaf,
Okay.
kind of a ovate leaf, if you will, and it has very deep veination. You can see here it's sort of an odd alternate, if you will, veination with one rib going here and one rib going down below. And that's something you'd use if you were taxonomically trying to identify something. If somebody brought you this leaf and you didn't see the flower, that'd be another way to try to decide what group and identify the plant. And people do that. I know when I worked as an extension horticulturist, people would bring us one part of a leaf and say, what is it? Mm-hmm. And then you start going through books and you try to find out where this identifies with something.
Yeah, and no doubt maybe a brown leaf that had been picked some weeks before.
Yeah, it's half the time they said we brought it back in our purse from Asia or something else, and you'd be going, okay, well that's tough. So we would put Opal on that and she would spend, a month and sometimes come up with the answer. But often we want to know more about the flower, the leaf, anything. Does it have the stems? Those are all things that you would use when you're trying to identify a plant, or if you're not sure what it is.
What is this thing that's sticking out of the actual flower?
This is the flower, and then the male part.
So that is the flower.
The long part would be the anthers, which are the male part.
Okay.
And then the stigma would be the inner part, would be the female receptive part. And if you were trying to pollinate this, you'd actually take some of the pollen from the male anthers and put them onto the stigma if you were coming up with a new variety. And this is a beautiful plant to have in your backyard.
The shrimp plant. Well, hey, how we doing? So it looks to me like we've got a plant that I'm familiar with. What are we doing? What do we got here?
We've got a Bougainvillea. It's one of your favorites because you can hear the burglars coming, right?
Well, at least it gives me a secondary security system to my home if I want to try to keep people from just coming on in.
I think this is an excellent plant because it gives you a vibrant color where it can be used. Now, Bougainvilleas are not real cold hardy. They're a Mexican plant originally. So you've got to remember, they like it hot and they like it sunny.
Okay.
If you've got really tough freezing conditions, you'd have to use it more as a hanging basket like it's used right here as an annual, or maybe where you could protect it during the cold.
Well, one of the things I think is interesting here is that I've never really seen it in a hanging basket like this. I don't know at first if that's exactly how I envision this plant, because it's got the thorns that stick off out of it. So anytime I see a hanging basket, it kind of encourages me to want to touch it, and I know I shouldn't with this particular plant.
Well, that's true, but now the thorns on this are probably half the size of the one that you have along your fence.
Oh, different variety.
So it's a different variety,
okay.
And you can see this also has some variegation in it.
It does, yeah. This is a really nice part of this leaf that I hadn't noticed before.
And typical variegation means that it won't have nearly as much chlorophyll, so this is going to be a little slower grower. And that's good for a hanging basket.
Okay.
Because now, along your fence, you want the thing to get up big and burly and grow over everything. In a basket, we don't want to have to be trimming all the time, so maybe a little bit of variegation is a good thing, plus it gives us another thing to look at.
Okay, so this is actually not the flower then. This is actually the leaf. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's a modified leaf called a sepal. The actual flower is kind of inconspicuous, that little white speck in the center. But the beauty of having a modified leaf is that will hold on for weeks and weeks and months, and there's very few flowers that will hold for months. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons that this has become such a showstopper and used throughout so many parts of the warm areas of the country. Or even in a hanging basket, you can see that this is used even in cooler areas during the spring and summer.
Sure. And again, the thought that comes to my mind is that I see all this lush color here now, but on the varieties that I have at home, they seem to flower and then they seem to go away, and then I don't see flowers for months on end, and then all of a sudden they pop out with flowers again. do some varieties seem to flower more often than others? Would this particular one flower more than say the ones I have at home?
Some varieties will flower more, and some of them will have a different flowering cycle, and that's true for all flowering plants. Also remember that they do have enough phosphorus, the second number in the fertilizer, and enough potassium. These also have little tiny beads also, but make sure that they don't need a lot of nitrogen, because a lot of nitrogen will give you a lot of growth. And plants either usually have a growth cycle or a flowering reproductive cycle. We really want these to be in their flowering reproductive cycle, so we don't want to hit with a real high first number, or you get a lot of spindly growth and not much flowering. So if you're looking for flowering, make sure that fertilizer is low first number, higher second number, and higher third number. And also make sure you have a good, well-draining soil.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think most of us, at least from my perspective, I like to see lots of flowers because that it just looks nicer and it's more aesthetically pleasing.
Also make sure you get good full sun. Full sun builds a lot of energy. If you put this in a shady spot, or sometimes we put it in a site like a fence area and trees are overhanging it, you start to lower the amount of light, you're lowering the amount of food that it gets, and also that means you're going to probably lower some of the flowering. It's going to be reaching out, trying to get to the light.
Sure, well, and especially these seem to like a lot of light.
High sun, 6 hours probably of good sun at least a day if you want a good flower.
Right.
You start getting less than that, and sometimes that occurs because of other shrubs, other trees that kind of overgrow it, and then you get less than what you were looking for.
Yes, and if you're going to put it in a spot and you need less light, then maybe you want to do something more like this.
Yeah, this would be a good choice for low light. This is a Schefflera arboricola, and often we see in cool areas of the country it's used as a house plant. But outside in warm areas, this makes a nice transition plant. Now, it doesn't flower that much, but it has real nice variegation in a creamy green leaf, and that combination really kind of gives you color really all year long just from the foliage.
Absolutely. So if you like a creamy green leaf, this is the one you want in a nice shady area.
And not much problem. Hardly ever seen any insects, hardly very little fungus. So I like that. It's a plant that's a pretty toughie. You know, we're looking for plants that you don't have to spray very often. This would fit into that bill.
Very good.
Plumbago, one of the most attractive plants with this really vibrant blue flower. Plumbagos are sometimes called leadwort. It's a common name for it. Plumbagos, I heard one announcer one time call them plumbagos. You could say that as well, but plumbago is the official name for it. And they come in some different shades of blue. You can find them in white as well. They'll flower for a good 9-10 months of the year. And you can't say that about too many plants that we have in the yard and garden. Now, it's kind of a free-flowing plant, so you're not going to keep it squared. If you like that, well, this is probably not the plant for you. But if you like something that has sort of a drift type situation, often this will be used with other plants to make a nice effect. And these will often be used in mass. So you'll have maybe a dozen or 10 or 20 of them, so you get a nice long bit of color. Plumbagos are easy to grow and they're tough. Very little insect problems, very little fungus problems, and that is a grand thing to have, because so many plants do have their share of problems. Plumbagos make a nice addition to the landscape. I'd water them on a pretty regular basis until they're established. Once they're established, they can pretty much survive on the natural amount of rain and water that we'll get. But it is nice to have an irrigation system where you can give it once or twice a week a good watering. I'd plant them with a good potting soil, improved soil, peat, maybe some cow manure. I would improve the soil, have good results by adding it in a good area where you get about 5 to 6 hours of good sun a day. Remember, there again, if it's a real shady spot, you're probably not building up enough energy and you won't get the amount of flowers that you're looking for. Plumbagos make an excellent addition to your landscape. Talking about beautiful plants, the chrysanthemums. Now, you might think of chrysanthemums only in the fall, and that's partly true, but today, when you can give it long night, short day, which you can do with shade houses, you can actually have chrysanthemums much of the year. So even though this plant has traditionally been one that we've only thought of during the fall, today you'll see them sometimes in the marketplace spring, summer, and fall. Now this one has a nice mix. And what happened when they started this one, they had some purple, they had some yellow, and they kind of mix them together as small little plants when they started it in the container way back when it began its beginning. So you could take the same tip and do that at home as well. Chrysanthemums often come in yellows and oranges and purple colors, and they make a nice little pom-pom, and they flower for a good long time. That's one of the reasons that they become very popular in the American landscape. It's an easy plant to grow. It will take a slight bit of frost, so normally you don't want it out during the coldest time of year, but anytime you're not in a frost condition, you could have them growing. And if it's a little light frost, you could actually just cover this little pom-pom over with a little blanket or a towel, and that would normally be enough for a slight freeze to still keep it happy and healthy. I'd fertilize them normally with a good either water soluble on a pretty regular basis, because remember, they're considered sort of an annual. They're all going to live, they're going to flower, and usually die in one season. In some cases, if you're in the deep south, you could cut them back dramatically at the end of the fall and be able to keep them alive and keep them going for more than one season. But it normally means you'd have to trim them back about 1/3. You'll notice often in a nursery situation, they're going to have them with little BBs of fertilizer in them, a time-released fertilizer. You also could apply something like that as well. They want a good draining soil, so peat, perlite. You want something that's real friable. That means something you could easily mix up and water can flow through it and oxygen can flow through it as well. Chrysanthemums are a nice plant to have as a background plant or as a border plant or as a specimen plant on your deck or maybe on your entryway of your home. Chrysanthemums are beautiful, they're vibrant, and they make a real nice addition to your landscape.
So it looks like we've got some really interesting flowering plants out here. What do we got going?
Well, we've got a hibiscus, which is this is called Painted Lady, which is a variety. There are thousands of varieties of hibiscus. And this one is a really, I think it's an outstanding, vibrant color.
Yeah, it's got a lot of intricate, this almost looks like a tie-dye effect going on here in the center. But what is this stem thing protruding up here?
Well, it's actually the blooming part, and we have both the anthers, which are on top, the male part, and we've got the stigma, which is the female part of the flower.
Okay.
And it shows up really well in a hibiscus. So for science teachers out there that want to teach a little bit of basic biology, the hibiscus makes an excellent plant to bring into the classroom.
Neat.
Now, the hibiscus is often considered a perennial in the tropics and subtropics.
And a perennial, that just means that it's going to bloom year after year?
Exactly, year after year.
Okay.
Now, in the cooler climates, they sometimes use these as an annual. They'll put them out and know that they're going to get frozen and die, and they just say, well, we'll go back to the garden supply store and get a new crop next year.
So in colder climates, they would then become an annual.
It would become an annual, or you might bring them into a heated garage and cut them maybe back 1/3 and try to milk them through the cool season until next spring, summer.
Okay, and for caring for these guys, when you're buying one of these hibiscuses, what kind of light level should we be looking at for this?
Probably about a good 6 hours plus a day. Remember, they've got a large leaf, but to flower, most flowering plants need more energy.
Okay.
And so don't stick it in the darkest corner, which is what some folks do. They go, well, on the north side, there's nothing bright over there, so we'll stick this beautiful hibiscus in. Well, on that, you're giving it a 1 bean a day diet.
Absolutely, and it seems like you need something to be contrasting with your white fence here, and so you got some nice color here to help with that. So again, I mean, when somebody's buying a hibiscus, should they be looking for something that already has lots of potential blooms on it already, or is it something that will come with time, or?
Yeah, picking the one with a lot of buds is a grand idea. In fact, we picked this the other day, or I should say my son picked it out, and he said,
That's me.
It doesn't have a lot of flowers today, but it has a ton of buds, so when we're ready to shoot this tomorrow, it's going to be ready for its close-up, Mr. DeMille.
That's right. Well, it kind of needs that. I did notice here on the top of these anthers is what you called them, I think. What are these little things with colors on the very tips? I mean, you got like little tiny tip things on the top of the anthers, and those kind of look different from other plants that I've seen.
Yeah, and that's actually the male part. with the pollen, and it's going to be.
So this is where the bees would land?
The bees would come in, and then they may get some of the nectar from the base of the flower.
Okay.
And a little sugary secretion. And of course, in their process of getting some of the little sugary secretion and pollen, which they may use, they inadvertently, of course, pollinate one from another. Now, normally, though, we would probably, if we're not hybridizing, we're going to take a cutting off of this.
Okay, and just so I understand, what is hybridizing? What do you mean by that?
Well, we would take the pollen from a known flower, and we would hand pollinate it. We would make sure that we take off.
So essentially people are doing the bee's job.
We're doing the bee's job, and only you're knowing exactly what flower that you took the pollen from, and you emasculate the other flower so it can't self-pollinate, and you're going to come up with then a new variety that may be better or maybe not.
Okay, so it's a lot of trial and error when they're doing the hybridization.
Oh, they will go through thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds to come up with just a few that have some unique characteristics that you've not seen before.
Okay, and the other thing I was going to ask too, I noticed you've got kind of a nice wide leaf here, and I'm assuming, just like any other plant, the wider the leaf, you know, it's so it can collect more sun?
Exactly. The larger the leaf, the better it is as a photosynthetic factory.
Okay.
And realize it's getting all of that energy. If you do put it into lower light, the leaf actually gets longer and bigger because it's trying to give itself more space for that photoelectric miracle of synthesizing its own food.
Yeah, well, that's very neat. So this is the, you call this the pink lady?
Painted lady.
Painted lady.
And,
Painted lady.
And there are a number of them. Say we just picked out one recently that was a hula girl that looks somewhat like this, but each one's a little bit different. And that's the beauty of this. You can have, they're literally yellows and whites and doubles and reds and greens. There was even one named for me called Mr. Greenthumb by one of the hybridizers that was in the Hibiscus Society, gosh, 30 years ago.
Nice. Okay, so that's the beautiful painted lady hibiscus.
James, we've got a beautiful rose.
It sure looks nice. I mean, or at least it did. I think this one's maybe had its better day. I mean, it looks like it's kind of...
It's faded a bit.
It's faded a bit, but I guess that's the nature of having roses.
It is, and of course you'll have new buds coming on. We've got new growth coming up here, so we've got a new bud right around the corner. Now with roses, you do want to try to keep the water off the foliage because black spot, powdery mildew, downy mildew are a potential.
Now when you say that, is this what we're talking about here with this particular leaf here?
Yeah, you've got one leaf there which you could break off if you want.
Okay.
And
I will.
And then the leaf is
I'll
gone.
hold it up for the camera person here.
For the audience, yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of see what he's talking about with the, I guess that's the black spot you're saying?
Black spot is a fungal disease, and you'll find a lot of products in your nursery, garden supply store that will handle that. You'll probably have to do it on a maybe weekly basis until you get it under control.
Okay, well it sure looks to me like, yeah, that wouldn't be as attractive if you had that on over the whole plant. So yeah, that makes sense to get rid of that. But this is just something that you have to be prepared for with roses, any type, or this particular
This is a
kind?
grandiflora, and many of the types are more prone to it. Yellows happen to be a variety, they're probably more prone to it than, let's say, the hardy Don Juan, which is a real bright red climber. It just seems to be genetically more predisposed to having a fungal problem. And the biggest problem with the black spot is the foliage starts to drop early. And we don't want that because, again, if we lose too much foliage, we don't get blooms.
Well, that makes sense. You don't want that. So when you go to buy one of these, I guess the first thing you need to think about is the light level where you're going to put it. And I guess the same thing that we had with the hibiscus is that it's got a nice wide leaf here, so it obviously needs a lot of light.
It does. 6 hours of bright sun a day are ideal. Wouldn't put it in anything less than that. Early morning light if you can to help dry off those foliage.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, and so we're spraying this thing quite a lot to try to prevent this?
Probably gonna have to spray from time to time, maybe once a week for a while, and once you get it under control, maybe you can hold off and then get your sprayer ready again when it shows up.
And what are people going to spray on this?
They'll find products in their nursery that'll list it, a fungicide listing itself for black spot and on roses.
Okay, so they can go into a big box store or a mom and pop nursery and they can find products that'll help them with this.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. Hi, I'm James DeFreitas with Ask Mr. Greenthumb, and we sure hope you've enjoyed our episode on spring color.